Welcome back to the Mythic Invitational. It's time to find out who will be advancing to the round of 16. Both of these players are 2-0, so whoever wins will be advancing on to the top 16 played later this week. Our first competitor from Canada is the Pro Tour Avacyn Restored Champion. Join me in welcoming Alexander Hayne. Yeah, Alexander Hayne doing a very popular pairing of decks, Mono Red Aggro and Esper Control. His opponent from USA, also a decorated player, a 5-time Grand Prix champion. Join in welcoming Nass. Matthew Nass, too, is going to be running Mono Red Aggro as well as Esper Control. And the real question is, what will the matchups wind up being? Because keep in mind, in Duo Standard, it's randomized, which deck is first and second. I'm excited to see what's going to happen. Let's head into the match, casters.
Thank you very much, Sean. We do indeed have the potential to see two mirror matches here, Paul. What do you think you want to be playing first in this matchup?
Well, I think it's actually quite close. Yeah. I think, again, we alluded to this before. Who goes first is quite important in the matchup. The mono red deck just wants to put on the pressure early, and if it's on the play, it doesn't really care if its creatures get swept up by cards like Cry of the Carnarium and Kaya's Wrath, as long as those creatures got in for some points of damage. So being on the play is extremely crucial for both players, depending on the matchup. Now, at the same time, it's very possible that we get two mirrors, but ultimately, going first is hugely important in this matchup.
All right. If we had to take a look at some of the decks here, Alexander Hayne running, of course, Esper Control and Mono Red. Esper Control list, anything special here? Anything we should be looking out for? What is the win condition here?
So taking a look here, very similar to many of the other Esper decks that we saw. This is classic control. You have your removal. You have your 4 copies of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, which is your primary win condition. But there's also Kaya Orzhov Usurper, which is also a way to win. And then also, of course, Mastermind's Acquisition gives you access to a 15-card sideboard that you can use to get whatever you need for whatever specific matchup. So that's the card that's going to be extremely important in this matchup, what Alex Hayne chooses to get with Mastermind's Acquisition if we do happen to see, for example, an Esper Mirror.
All right, the game is almost ready to kick off, so let's see which decks the players will be playing. I'm very excited for this. This is, of course, a win and in for our players, so whoever wins here is in Final 16.
Yeah, this is, two of the best players in the world, 2 MPL players going up against each other here with, effectively the exact same decks. So, it's going to be a true test of skill, especially if the pairings happen in such a way where you're just going to see a bunch of mirrors. And if you see the Esper Control mirror, we might be stuck here a while. And it might get all the way down to the end because both decks play lots of removal and not a lot of ways to win. So oftentimes you're going to have games that do come down to, last card standing in your deck.
All right, well, we are ready to rock and roll. We are starting off with Mono Red for Alexander Hayne. Let's take a look at this opening hand. 3 Mountains, Shock, Lightning Strike. That's a whole bunch of go-away spells in his opening hand, with Experimental Frenzy as well. What would you do in this situation?
This is a super interesting hand for Alex Hayne. If he knew that Matt Nass was on Mono Red, I think this is a key, because you have the interaction early. You have Shock, Lightning Strike, and Wizard's Lightning.
Oh, it's a Mono Red mirror, friends.
Right. But if you're playing against an Esper, control deck, having a handful of burn spells is not exactly how you want to start off in the matchup. You want your Firebrands, you want your cheap creatures, and then finish off your opponent with burn spells.
Fair. So, looking at these 2 opening hands, would you say that Matt Nass has the better opening hand just by having the 2 1-drops in the hand, as well as the Vyashin and Pyromancer, getting those wizards down?
So I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Given that it's a mirror, if Alex Hayne did choose to keep his opening hand, I think his hand is suited very well for Matt Nass's hand, which is a very creature-heavy hand.
Yeah.
If Alex Hayne can just get all these creatures off the battlefield and follow that up with a turn 4 Experimental Frenzy, that's the card that will break open the mirror.
All right, well, let's see. As soon as they are ready to rock and roll, we will be underway.
Yeah, and with Matt's hand, I don't really see Matt mulliganing this hand. You have a bunch of creatures. Sure, the Gitu Lava Runner you're not going to be able to turn on soon, but the deck is just filled with a ton of instants and sorceries. So getting that second creature into, the second spell into the graveyard to kind of trigger the Lava Runner and give it that +1/+0 in haste should be fairly trivial in this matchup.
Also, the Wizards being the card that allows you to play Wizards Lightning, obviously for one spell cheaper. So having 4 of them in the opening hand, yeah, that's going to result in some very cheap burn spells if any of them do manage to stay on the board.
Yeah, a lot more likely to be able to cast any Wizards Lightnings that the deck would have. And it looks like Nass has finally decided to keep his opener here.
We are underway. Mountain, get to Lava Runner, go.
And Alex has got to be thrilled that he's seeing Mountain coming as a first play for Nass here. As now he can use all those burn spells targeted at those creatures and then ultimately try to come back and get ahead with that Experimental Frenzy.
So Hayne getting rid of the Gitsy Lava Runner straight away. Viashina Pyromancer in response from Nass will deal 2 damage to Alex Hayne.
Yeah, interesting scenario there. Nass deciding whether or not he wants to play out the Pyromancer or the 2 1-drops in his hand in Gitu Lava Runner and the Fanatical Firebrand.
So in response, there are 2 Lightning Strikes as well as Wizard Lightning. Sorry, as well as a Fanatical Firebrand in Alexander Hayne's hand. What do you think we'll see here? I think we'll see a Fanatical Firebrand just removing that Wizard off the board. Is it worthwhile using a Lightning Strike on a 1 toughness creature?
I think so, because if ultimately your endgame plan is to try to win with Experimental Frenzy, you already want to empty out your hand. So I can see a scenario where Alex Hayne chooses to use Lightning Strike to kind of take advantage of his mana. For example, if he uses Lightning Strike there and then follows up the following turn with Lightning Strike Firebrand, then he's much closer to emptying out his hand for the Frenzy. But it looks like Alex Hayne is choosing to keep the Lightning Strikes for potentially bigger creatures that Nass could play. For example, a Goblin Chain Whirler on turn 3.
So Gitsy Lava Runner hits the board. No haste, unfortunately. No other instant or sorcery in the graveyard for Nass.
And also Alex Hayne here could choose to just fire off Wizard's Lightning, of course, instead of the Lightning Strike, utilize all of his mana, get the biggest threat off the battlefield. And then next turn, given that he drew land number 4, he can fire off the 2 Lightning Strikes, and then on the turn afterwards, start going to 10 with that Experimental Frenzy.
Exactly that. Wizard's Lightning dispatching of the Viashina Pyromancer, so only taking 2 damage to the face.
Yeah, at this point, Alex Hayne really just wants to preserve his life total, keep it as high as possible so that it's safe to kind of basically spend your entire turn to tap out and play that Experimental Frenzy.
Now, would you say, as useful as Experimental Frenzy is, it does kind of stall the mono red player in the matchup especially? Like, would you rather have a handful of burn, or does the Experimental Frenzy just outright win it for you?
I think if you have the type of draw that's able to deal with all the threats on your opponent's board, Frenzy is like the single most powerful card in the matchup. And Alex Hayne did draw a ton of removal for the matchup. So I think you know, Alex should be fairly happy here. He does need to kind of fade some removal spells that Nass can draw, but now he's going to have to fire off this Lightning Strike on the Pyromancer. Still taking 2 damage, and he is going down to 10. But he's got to be happy. Nass has no cards in hand.
Revealing that I am handless. Essentially, I have nothing to do in response to you. So this actually opens up the opportunity to play Experimental Frenzy and basically just build from there. But I think the Legion Warboss will hit the board first, apply a little bit of extra pressure there. The Goblin token, of course, having to attack each turn.
Yeah, but Nass has a lot of great draws here. There's a Lightning Strike off the top here for the Legion Warboss. That's going to get Alex Hayne down to 7 life here. So Nass, with the onboard Fanatical Firebrand, just needs to draw 2 3 damage burn spells for lethal.
I think Hayne might decide to get rid of these creatures on the board here, just in case that top deck is favorable for Nass.
Right.
So the Gitu Lava Runner getting dispatched of, and the Fanatical Firebrand might meet the same fate, but let's see what happens.
I mean, he is in a, it is interesting. He could just choose to fire it off, but what happens if Nass draws something like a Goblin Chain Whirler? If he does, then Alex Hayne is going to wish that he held on to that Lightning Strike. So it looks like he's opting to wait here instead. And Nass going for the burn plan here, because he's sitting at a safe 17 life, draws a light up the stage off the top, needs to find some burn spells.
Wow, what a draw. Runaway Steamkin into another light up the stage. That's a pretty good draw there. I think you'd be quite happy to see that.
All right, can we find some burn spells here off the light up the stage?
That Lightning Strike in Alex Hayne's just itching to come out and kill that Runaway Steamkin before it can get out of hand.
Right, and shocking Goblin Chain Whirler is representing 3 points of damage, which means Alex Hayne would be going down to 3 life. Time to run out the Frenzy and see what's on top.
All right. Let's take a look at Alex Hayne's perspective, just so we can see exactly what he is grabbing out from the top of his deck there. Chain Whirler, getting rid of that token, dealing 1 damage to the face, and the shock following up as well.
All right, here we go. Frenzy time. Oh, and that's one of the
Another
worst cards you
Frenzy
can
on
have
top.
on top with the Experimental Frenzy. That is another Frenzy, and it's going to be really, really tough now for Alex
That
Hayne.
hurts. But there is a blocker, at least, thankfully. Only a mountain drawn.
And that's it.
Fanatical, oh yes, that is it. Fanatical Firebrand. Getting rid of the Steamkin and the Chain Whirler, swinging in for lethal. Game 1 goes to Matt Nass. Ooh wee, that was a quick one.
Well, that's generally what happens when you have the mono red mirror, but as you can see there, that is the one downside of Experimental Frenzy. It's not just a card that's going to get you 10 spells in a row, because that's often what it feels like when you play against the card, but there are going to be those instances where your opponents find 2 lands on top, for example, or additional Experimental Frenzies, and in those situations, especially when you're on the back foot, it can be very punishing.
Yeah. I've played mono red a few times where I have the Experimental Frenzy down and I find the second one, it's like, oh, no. But yes, that of course means that the Esper Control Mirror is up next.
I have a feeling this one's going to take a little bit longer than the other one.
You know,
and both
slow cruise through.
Yeah, and as you can see, both players with effectively the same deck. I will say that Matt Nass is playing 2 copies of Mastermind's Acquisition instead of Alex Hayne's 1, and that could be very impactful, because in a matchup like this where it's all about trading your important resources, the important cards in the matchup being Teferi, Counter Magic, and Hand Disruption and Card Draw, having that one additional threat could be the difference maker in the matchup.
Now in this matchup, obviously there's not a whole bunch of creatures that are going to be hitting the board, so cards like Cry of the Carnarium, do they ever find a home, or are they just a dead card sitting
They do absolutely nothing, basically.
Absolutely
Cards like Cry of the Carnarium, Moment of Craving, Cast Down, even Kaya's Wrath, a lot of those cards are not going to be doing a whole lot, and because both of these decks do play so much removal, you're often just going to be seeing situations where only very few cards actually matter in the matchup.
Both players getting a peek at each other's hands with turn 2 Thought Erasures on both sides. So, no, it's not much of a secret what the other is playing.
Right. So here are some of the key cards in the matchup. Of course, Search for Azcanta. Search for Azcanta, extremely important, extremely powerful in the matchup. However, it is very important that you can cast it and flip it before your opponents are able to cast Mortify on it, because it is one of the few cards that actually turns on your opponent's removal, as Mortify does have the ability to destroy enchantments on top of creatures.
So the players just sussing each other out now. Search for Azcanta going to give Alex Hayne a scry off the top of his deck. Does he choose to bin it or keep it? Let's find out.
Another card that's extremely important in the matchup is Chemist's Insight. As you can see, both players drew it. Chemist's Insight not only allows you to smooth out your draws, gives you that card advantage, but it also allows you to discard those dead removal spells that you draw in the matchup for additional cards.
Exactly that. So in this matchup, where do we start to see the advantage bar shifting? Is it whoever gets Teferi down first? Is it whoever flips Azcanta first?
It is small. If you can flip Search for Azcanta, that is huge. That's one of the biggest things. Teferi also is extremely important. If you can resolve it, not get it countered, and not get it exposed to Vraska's Contempt, an active Teferi for 2 or 3 turns can also run away with the game. But yes, those consistent sources of card advantage, cards like Chemist's Insight, Search for Azcanta, and Teferi, if you can get those cards, if you can either draw Chemist's Insight or get those other permanents to stick, that's how you kind of take over the game. That's how you can actually get a 10-minute match of the Esper Mirror.
All right, Thought Erasure dismissing of poor Teferi. He hits the graveyard. And not much going on the side of the board for Matt Nass at the moment.
Yeah, Matt Nass in a really tough situation here, because that Search for Azcanta is very close to flipping, and Matt Nass has not been able to find a Mortify to deal with it.
Not yet. Probably will see the Chemist's Insight.
Oh, and there it is.
Oh, there we go. Azcanta is flipped. Now allowing Alex to dig through his deck and find all the answers that he could possibly need. So Chemist's Insight getting rid of the Cry of the Carnarium there, because it won't find a target in this matchup. Neither will Kaya's Wrath.
Yeah, as you can see, this is exactly what happens in this type of matchup. I mean, even though you're drawing a bunch of cards, half of your deck is just a bunch of removal spells, because of course you have to play the removal spells if you want to compete with all the aggressive decks in the format.
Yes. So should this game go into a game 3, what do you think is the preferred deck for both players? Do you think they would both want to be in the aggro mirror or the control mirror, or alternate?
Well, what I would, so with it, this is tiny edges, right? Tiny edges on both sides, because both players are playing effectively the mirror.
Yeah.
If I was either player, I would take a close look at, I would have taken a close look at what configuration of Esper both players had. Now, if Matt Nass, for example, even a couple of tiny things, right? Because the games go so long, you see almost every single card. If Matt Nass has an additional negate, if Matt Nass has an additional Mastermind's acquisition, I would feel like I'm a small dog in that matchup, and then I might just choose to bring the mono red.
Fair enough. We see Teferi, hero of Dominaria, hitting the board now with Absorb mana up, which is very, very important here.
Right, but look at Alex Hayne's hand. It's completely juiced at this point because he's had that Ascanta the Sunken Ruin flip for a couple of turns. He's got Absorb, Syncopate, and Negate, and Matt Nass at this point is just crossing his fingers, really hoping that this Absorb is going to be the card that does it.
Please don't have counter spells, please. So the Absorb will most likely get absorbed.
Right,
Yep.
but Matt Nass also knows about the Syncopate in Alex Hayne's hand.
So this is this is what you call the stack, friends.
Yes.
That's what happens when two control players go at each other.
Yeah, when you have a deck with a bunch of counter magic on both sides, and both players jockeying to try to resolve a spell, this is exactly what happens. And oftentimes, in the control mirror, you want to be the person who's not the one trying to run out the threat first. You want to be the one that's reactive because then you have access to mana to be able to cast multiple counters, while Matt Nass only had access to that Absorb and had to effectively tap out. But Matt Nass's hand was also forced because of that flipped search for Ascanta.
Now, Matt Nass does have the comfort in knowing that there's only possibly one more counter spell, and that is going to hit the board now, getting rid of Mastermind's acquisition, which allows the players to dig into their toolbox of the sideboard, but not this time, says Alex Hayne. Moment of Craving and Kaya's Wrath. I'm not going to do much for Matt Nass here, so he has to hopefully find another card draw spell or something just to get him back in this game.
Yeah, at this point, Alex Hayne definitely in the lead here with that Ascanta the Sunken Ruin on the battlefield. Finds a Kaya, which honestly doesn't do a whole lot, but it will ultimately end the game. It will steal the game. So now Alex Hayne is going to be using the Kaya to start exiling some of the better spells in Matt Nass's graveyard here.
Yeah, sure. A good target for Kaya as well in this matchup. If there was a Chemist's Insight in the graveyard, getting rid of that is a very, very important play, I would say. But unfortunately, no card draw in Matt Nass's graveyard at the moment.
And as you can see, Alex Hayne has the ability to cast Chemist's Insight from the graveyard, but instead he's choosing to activate Ascanta, because Ascanta digs you deeper. It doesn't get you the 2 cards, but it lets you look at the top 4 cards, and all Alex Hayne is looking for now is counter magic and possibly cards like Vraska's Contempt if Matt Nass, for example, happens to draw a Teferi Hero of Dominaria off the top.
Still nothing off the top there for Matt Nass, just drawing the land. Ascanta having a dig again through the library of Alex Hayne.
There it is.
There we go. Chemist's Insight, drawing Mastermind's Acquisition, Kaya's Wrath, and Matt Nass says, yep, nope, this is not going well for me. Let's go to the next one.
And that was the
victory for Alex Hayne. Right.
That was one of the faster Esper mirrors.
Yeah.
But that is what happens, right? If one player does have that continuous source of card advantage, while the other player is just drawing a bunch of lands and removal spells, at some point you're just way too far behind. And that's exactly what happened. At the end there, Alex Hayne was up like 5 or 6 cards, and it was just way too difficult for Matt Nass to be able to navigate around that, especially once Absorb was revealed off that Ascanta the Sunken Ruin.
Way too much card advantage, way too much card draw. I think that was the correct decision there. Let's move to the next game. Let's get that done, wrapped up as fast as possible. Let's see what the opening hands look like. What do you think of this? A keep from both players, it seems.
Oh, and interesting, both players opting.
Going for Esper.
And Matt Nass going, you know what? I got to get my revenge. I know I won with the red deck, but you know what? Honestly, I feel like I ran a little bit poorly in that last game, and I feel like my setup is slightly better. I did mention that he does have the 2 copies of Mastermind's Acquisition, which could go a long way here.
So statistically speaking, the Esper deck is the stronger out of the 2, correct? Between mono red and control.
Well, so the Esper deck has a better ability to, I want to say, break serve. So if it's on the draw, it does have a better ability to come back against the aggressive decks because it has access to those sweepers. So even if your opponents do get off to a good start with a bunch of creatures, you can still draw Cry of the Carnarium or life gain effects like Moment of Craving to be able to kind of counteract that. So yeah, I think both would have been completely reasonable options. But again, the players have to choose their decks prior to knowing whether or not they go first in that last game.
All right. So neither player drawing Search for Azcanta just yet. Hayne is ready to mortify it if it does arrive.
So this is a big interaction here I want to talk about.
All right.
Matt Nass is thinking, okay, you know what? I'm just going to cast Chemist's Insight. It's basically free. One of the best answers in the format to Chemist's Insight is Syncopate, as it's a counterspell. However, it exiles the spell being cast. So you cannot jumpstart the Chemist's Insight. So when this happens, you feel like
that hurts.
you just lost it all, because Chemist's Insight is so important in the matchup because you really needed to cycle through all your bad dead removal spells. And given that it's been syncopated now, Matt Nass has nothing else to follow this up.
Luckily though for Matt Nass, he does have the second one that is already in the bin. So he does have, thankfully, that at his disposal, getting rid of the Kai's Wrath, which won't do anything for him in this matchup. Matt Nass's hand is looking pretty good, and finding the third Chemist's Insight.
So it didn't matter. Continuing to change the Chemist's Insight.
But
meanwhile,
it still hurts a little though to see
yeah,
that
it does.
getting exiled. Yeah.
Anytime your opponent gets a little bit of value on you, it always hurts. It always hurts.
Alright, so Chemist's Insight hitting the board again. And finding Thought Erasure and Bubble Shrine, as well as Teferi. Alright.
This is an extremely strong sequence of draws for Matt Nass. Not only did he find Thought Erasure to know that the coast is clear, he also drew the threat that he needed to resolve this turn. So now we can go Thought Erasure into Teferi, get ahead on cards with Teferi, also has a Chemist's Insight in graveyard. So Alex Hayne only has, I want to say, maybe a 1 or 2 turn window here to try to find an answer to this Teferi.
Let's see if we can find it. Isolated Chapel will not do it for him.
Oh, and this, yeah. Matt Nass at this point is going to be slowly locking up the game. He's now been able to untap, has a backup Teferi here of Dominaria, along with an Absorb to protect this Teferi from a card like Vraska's Contempt.
But unfortunately, nothing like that in Alex Hayne's hand. He needs to find some answers, and quickly, or Teferi is going to run away with this game.
Absolutely.
He's going to keep ticking up, untapping that land, keeping the counter spells active. What did Alex find? Alex found his own here. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, but I think this is going to be swiftly dealt with via Absorb.
Yeah, he also had the option of just going for a Vraska's Contempt, but actually it looks like Matt Nass wants to aggressively tick up that Teferi and get to that emblem as quickly as possible, because if Alex Hayne's Teferi resolved, he could have used the minus ability to put Matt Nass's Teferi third from the top, which would have taken away all the loyalty that Matt Nass has been building up.
So the correct decision there, I think. Don't let Teferi hit the board because they can activate their abilities straight away.
But a big draw from Alex, and he finds Vraska's Contempt, and it looks like he's probably going to set an upkeep stop on Matt Nass's turn in case Matt Nass has counter magic to cast that Vraska's Contempt on Matt Nass's turn to try to tax his mana a little bit. That's what I'm assuming is going to be happening here. But of course, we all know that Matt Nass has the backup Teferi.
There is a bunch of land in Matt Nass's hand, which I'm pretty sure he doesn't want to be seeing. I think he's drawn land like a few turns in a row now. So hopefully he draws some other answers, some more counter spells. Would he ever Vraska's Contempt his own Teferi?
Don't think so, because the life is just not very relevant.
Yeah, it's not too relevant in this. All right, so we have the Absorb in the hand of Matt Nass. So he is good to protect his Teferi. Another Kai's Wrath, unfortunately, off the top, which won't do much for him.
Yeah, and Matt Nass again. You just see how this. You just see how this can snowball out of control, where one player has the active Planeswalker or a flip Search for Azcanta, getting you cards every single turn.
Certainly two of the strongest cards in Standard at the moment.
Definitely. And as you can see, Alex Hayne choosing not to play Search for Azcanta there, because if you see that little eyeball sign on the Mortified, Alex Hayne is aware of Mortify in Matt Nass's hand. So before casting the Search for Azcanta, Alex Hayne is looking for either counter magic to protect Search or a Thought Erasure to try to clear the way to resolve that Search for Azcanta.
All right, Chemist's Insight in play now, drawing 2 cards for Alex. Unfortunately, 2 lands. It's not what you want to see. You want to find your answers. You want to find your Vraska's Contempts or your own Teferi. just to try and put up a fight here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now the game just firmly in Matt Nass's favor here. He's got 2 counter spells at this point. He's got Absorb and Negate to Teferi on the battlefield. And answers to all of Alex Hayne's potential top decks.
Now, in a control matchup, how aggressive do you want to play? Because I know you have to make your opponent have it, right? The longer you wait to play something, the longer you give your opponent to find the answer that you're worried about. Like,
yeah, the control matchup it's a very interesting dynamic. Oftentimes, it's correct to just play what I like to say draw-go game, where you draw a card for your turn, play your land, and you pass. And oftentimes, it's the first person who flinches that loses. But this matchup is a little bit different because both decks also play cards like Thought Erasure, which allows you to be a little more proactive in trying to resolve your spells. If you can resolve Thought Erasure, it gives you perfect information. Once you know what you can play around, then you can be a little more aggressive with trying to resolve your permanents.
So Search for Scan to hit the board. Matt Nass attempts to mortify it and absorb in response from Alexander Hayne. Does he negate here? Does he absorb? What is the play?
I think normally you go for the Absorb here because in the matchup there are no creatures in the deck, so the Negate is a more efficient counter spell, and you might want to save that at a later point in the game.
Specifically for Teferis or Restless Contempts or anything like that.
Absolutely.
All right. So Matt Nass deciding.
Sorry, I just wanted to also point out that there are situations, however, where if your opponent happens to resolve their Teferi or their Search, that's when, at that point, you can't play around anything because you need to match your opponent card for card. Then you have to force the issue, even though there's a very high likelihood that your opponent can stop you with a counterspell.
All right. Another spare Teferi in the hand of Matt Nass now. Mastermind's acquisition as well. He's going to go digging into his toolbox. What does he find here? It's a whole bunch of goodness. Do we see another Mirari Conjecture off of a Mastermind's acquisition like we saw in round 2?
The world is his oyster. He has 15 cards to choose from, a lot of powerful effects. Clear to mind if he thinks the game's going to go very long and he just wants to recycle through all of his threats. But the Mirari, I believe the Mirari Conjecture is one of the most commonly searched for cards in the control matchup because not only do you get to get back your Mastermind's acquisition at some point, but you can also go back and kind of dig your absorbs and counter magic also back as well.
Restless Contempts, whatever you might need out of your graveyard. So opting for the absorb just in case there's any other mortifies or Restless Contempts from Alex Hayne. But as you can see, the advantage bar is still firmly in Matt Nass's hand.
And good game.
Good game from Alex Hayne. Matt Nass advances. I believe he is the first through to the 16 players.
He just won, and he's now in the winning.
Congratulations, Matt
3-0.
Nass. That is awesome. So his day's done. He's easy peasy mac and cheesy.
Right, right. Meanwhile, Alex Hayne now currently sitting with 1 loss. And still, of course, has plenty of opportunities to make it into that top 16.
All right, so Alex Hayne, unfortunately, into the lower bracket, but Matt Nass is through to the top 16, which is fantastic for him. I hope that he advances, and it's going to be interesting to see what he faces, or who he faces, rather, because we still have a bunch of games underway to show you guys, which we'll get to very shortly. So what did you think of that match? What do you think were some of the defining moments, or like the flipping of the Escantas, getting to fairy ticking?
Yeah, so this was a true mirror, right? Because not only do you have 2 of the best players going at it, you're not going to say that there's a significant skill edge between the 2 players, right? And they had the same decks. On top of that, what we saw was basically the first person to resolve their threat unanswered ran away with the game. Because those cards like Teferi and Escanta the Sunken Ruin, if left unchecked, you're just going to be so far ahead on cards and threats that the other player is eventually just going to run out of cards.
Exactly that. Becca is ready with Matt Nass, so let's throw it over to her and see how he feels.